Welcome back to the channel. My name is Caleb Foltz, also known as CF3. I am a wide receiver here at the University of Mount Union. Today I'm sitting down with my strength and conditioning coach, Coach Kyle. How you doing, Coach?
I'm doing pretty good, man. How are you?
Well, I'm just doing great. I'm doing great. I'm excited for this interview. I asked Coach Kyle one day when I was lifting if he would do this with me because I feel like he had some great knowledge. I actually came in to fall camp my freshman year at 155 pounds, and this man helped me get to 190. So extremely grateful. The thing I was really lacking in my, my lifting journey and my lifting smartness or knowledge was nutrition. I was lifting, but I wouldn't be eating. And Coach Kyle was like, just eat, dude. I started eating, and now I'm 190. So that's the key to getting big, right?
Yeah, it is, man. You seriously look like a different person from the start of last year.
Heck yeah.
I know I tell you that all the time, but like you came in little boy status, now you're grown man status.
Heck yeah. Love to see it. We love to see it. All right, so we'll just jump right into the questions. And get to know Coach Kyle and kind of like his journey as a strength and conditioning coach, but also a college football player. So first question, can you share some of your personal experiences as a college football player and how that shaped your approach to strength and conditioning?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I'll take a step back. So we'll jump back to high school, and that kind of will frame like why I really got interested in like strength training. So I went to a small high school, kind of like you. You and I have talked about that a lot. And I was undersized. So I played on the offensive line in high school. My sophomore year, I weighed about 205 pounds, and I started at center. And I did pretty well because I was an aggressive player. But I knew that if I wanted to play in college, like I was really going to have to devote myself to the weight room and to getting stronger, to getting bigger. And that's what I did. And I realized like through like that process that like strength and conditioning really could make a massive difference in any athlete who's trying to make it to the next level. Right. So for me, from the time I was a sophomore until I was a senior in high school, I put on about 50, 60 pounds. And so, that made a huge difference. And it actually started getting me some notice from colleges. Like at 205 pounds playing center, no colleges were sending me any looks, anything at all. But as 260 pounds as a senior playing center, like I started getting some notice. I started getting visits from colleges. I started getting letters in the mail, phone calls, things like that. And I really attribute a lot of that to the work that I put in the weight room. And that kind of like sparked a passion for strength conditioning. I mean, I would say it started in high school, and then it just like grew once we got into college. Because like in high school, it didn't really have a strength conditioning coach. It was just a football coach. In college, it was still one of our football coaches, but he was actually like certified as a strength and conditioning coach. So I feel like I learned a ton more about it just going through like a college football strength conditioning program. And that just like drove my like passion for it even more. So I would say it came from seeing what the work that I was putting in, like in the weight room, how it could pay off like on the field, and how it like paid off to get me to actually make it to the next level into college.
Oh, wow. Okay. You kind of sparked a random question. Were you before like Twitter recruitment? Like when you go on Twitter and you like set up a profile and like coach reach out to you on Twitter, like were you before that?
Yeah.
So like how was getting recruited in terms of like that? Like how did you get recruited without like being on Twitter? Because I feel like Twitter is so important now to get recruited.
Yeah, I mean it is, and it's like if you don't have a Twitter profile now and you're trying to get recruited, it's like that's the first step.
Mm-hmm.
Make one. Like back then, like Twitter was probably starting to come out. I know we had Facebook for sure, like when I was in high school, but Twitter, I'm not even sure when it came out. So for me, it was really like relying on my high school coach to like put those feelers out there, because I didn't really go to there wasn't as many like camps like there are now that can kind of give you like kind of get your like name out there, kind of get some of your stats out there. We didn't have that. So it was really relying on my coach and like the connections my coach had, but it was also on me. Like it was on me to like send out film to schools that I was interested in, to make those follow-up phone calls to coaches. Like if I got something in the mail, then like it was up to me to like, hey, like let's reach out, let's, send an email, make a phone call, just let people know like, hey, I'm interested in playing like at the next level. So it was a little bit different than it is now.
Okay.
Yeah.
What kind of offers like were you receiving? Were you receiving like D2 and D3 or any D1 or anything?
So I was getting looked at heavily at the Division 3 level. And I had some Division 2 like offers that like trickled in as well. A couple NAIA schools. And then the only Division 1 school that was looking at me seriously was the University of Dayton. But they're like in that like Pioneer Football League. And so it's Division 1, but they're like non-scholarship. So it's probably a little more similar to Division 3. So I would say like a lot of Division 3 offers, and then probably like 3 or 4 Division 2 offers. And that's the route I ended up going. I accepted one of the Division 2. So I played at Urbana University.
Yeah. Well, we won't get to that one. We won't get into that one. Okay, so we'll move on to the next question then. So what inspired you to become a strength and conditioning coach, particularly for college athletes?
So I think like I really got my first like dose of coaching right after I finished playing. So I finished as a, my senior season, and then going into the spring, I was just a regular college student. But I still had like, this urge to be a part of like the football program. So I like offered my time up and was a student assistant coach for the football team. And it just like, that's where like I really felt a passion for coaching. It wasn't even necessarily like strength and conditioning, but it was like, it was coaching football, but it was coaching, that age range, that college age range. And I feel like that's where it started at. And then it just like kind of grew from there. So I do a lot of like personal training, and I do a lot of coaching with college athletes, but also with like older people and with like younger athletes as well. And I would say that like college is my favorite age. I think it's my favorite because for me, like college was such a interesting time in my life where I started, really discovering myself and the things that I was truly interested and passionate about. And it was also a very trying time in my life, right? There was a lot of good things going on, a lot of bad things going on. And I feel like I didn't have a ton of guidance from anybody other than like coaches when I was that age group. And that is kind of what like led me to want to get into it. I wanted to like give back because I had coaches that kind of helped me become a man. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to help like college age, like guys and girls like grow up into like adults and successful adults and kind of help guide them on their path to like wherever life was going to take them.
That's awesome because that's like part of the reason I want to get into coaching. Like that's crazy. That's awesome. I mean, really wholesome as well.
Yeah.
Well, my next question was, what was your path to becoming a fitness coach? But I guess you kind of answered that in terms of like college and being a grad assistant and stuff. So more on the next one, which is, what are some key differences between training different sports versus football exclusively, and how do you tailor your programs to meet those needs?
That's a really good question. So if we're talking like strength and conditioning, like we'll talk about like college athletes. So no matter what sport you're playing, like you can still benefit from getting like bigger, faster, and stronger, right? So like if we're looking at like training a soccer player versus training a football player, right? There's not a lot of difference in like the structure of the workout, right? Like they're going to come in, and when we do our workouts, we're usually hitting some like faster movements at the beginning, right? So like our more explosive like lifts, like jumps, plyometric sprints, things like that. Then like in the middle of the workout, that's like meat and potatoes, like strength stuff, like where we might hit like squats or like bench press, things like that. And then like we always have like some accessory like exercises towards the end. That structure doesn't really change like the sport, given the sport. We might just have like a little bit more of a focus on, let's say like for a football player versus like a baseball player. So both of these sports are very like the athletes in these sports are very explosive, right? Like if you're a baseball player, you're waiting on a pitch, and if you get the right one, you're sending it 400 yards or 400 feet into the outfield, right? So it's one explosive movement, kind of like if you're a running back or something, like you get the ball and you're taking off for an explosive sprint, right? Everything's happening like in a short duration of time. The difference would be like with football, it's a lot of like horizontal movements, right? So like if you are like running the ball, you're trying to get downfield. If you're blocking somebody, you're trying to block somebody downfield. Whereas like with baseball, there's a lot more like rotational movements involved, right? So swinging a bat, throwing a ball, we're rotating through our core a little bit. So like a difference there might just be incorporating more exercises to train that explosive like rotational power. We'd probably spend a little bit more time like with the baseball team doing that than with the football team. But as far as like trying to make them bigger, faster, and stronger, it's not a crazy difference across sports. Like it's very little differences. But like if you were to look at a workout that I had on the board, like for the soccer team next to the football team, and you really like went through it, you'd be like, it's really not that much different. Like there might be a few different exercises here and there, but like we're still trying to like build strength in our legs, right? We're still trying to like get explosive. So you're going to have jumps, you're going to have cleans, you're going to have things like that in it. Not a ton difference. Like the only time we would get like more specific would be like getting closer and closer to the season, or like, you know, if there was something specific that a coach really wanted to see his team like do or her team do, we might like, you know, veer away from like some of the traditional stuff and do something specific. But really like all athletes are going to benefit from getting bigger, faster, and stronger, like I was saying. So not a ton different, honestly.
It just sounds like you're just emphasizing like the different like fundamentals and mechanics of like each sport. Like you're trying to strengthen each mechanic. Like with baseball, you're trying to like work on the hips so they can swing better, throw better. But like football, it's like we just gotta be more explosive and stuff. It sounds like you're just trying to build off the fundamentals and like strengthen the mechanics. That makes sense.
Yeah, and that's like and that's part of it. So like that would be like a unique difference between like baseball and football. But like in both sports, we have to sprint, right? Like you have to run fast. So incorporating like sprints into like a baseball team's program and a football team's program, like not crazy different. Like the difference there might be like the baseball team actually running a little bit farther than the football team would. It's like the football, like if we're talking like combine testing and stuff like that, the 40 is like as far as anybody's really getting like timed on. But if we're talking baseball, they run a 60, right? So like if we were like preparing an athlete for that type of testing, like it's going to be similar sorts of like, it's going to be a similar running program. We might just get a little bit farther with the baseball team than we do football.
So like, what would the difference be between like a track sprinter versus like a cross country runner? Like how would you train them differently?
So in terms of in the weight room, not much differently. Like I would say that regardless of like being like a long distance runner or being like a sprinter, you still can benefit from being bigger, faster, and stronger. Like maybe with like that cross country runner, we're not going to spend a ton of time in like hypertrophy training because like they don't necessarily need to be heavier to like do better at their sport, right? Like putting on weight as a cross country runner doesn't make a ton of sense. Right? If you look at those guys and girls, like they're pretty thin, right? But if we can build strength just through things like, you know, lunges or squats or things like that to build up their lower body, that's only going to help them feel stronger when they're running, right? So we still will train them like to build power, to build strength, and, you know, to build a little bit of muscle. I would say that the key difference is, and this is for like any sport, the real differences come from the training that you do like in practice, the training that you do on the field, right? So like a sprinter's workout is going to look very different than like a long distance runner's workout, right? Like the sprinters are, you know, their sprints are, you know, depending on what event they do, like they're probably under 100 yards, right? If we're talking like the cross country team, like they're probably running more than 3 miles every time that they run. Like it's just different. So I would say like same with like any of these sports, like the biggest differences come from the work that you're putting like on the field or on the court or like out on the track or, you know, whatever.
Okay. All right. That makes a whole lot of sense to me. So, next question. Can you explain how strength and conditioning translates to performance on the field?
Yeah. I mean, I think you and I were talking about this a little bit as we were walking over here. So I talked about, you know, getting getting like bigger and more explosive and stronger, like in the weight room, will help you to some degree in your sport. But really, like, you becoming a better wide receiver is you putting that time in out on the field, running routes, catching balls, like those things, right? So skills, like skill specific stuff, is like not what we do in the weight room, right? So in the weight room, our goal is to, right, build strength, build power, and build some speed, and those qualities, and to condition you, right? We're going to have you do some things that aren't all that fun sometimes, right? To build a little bit of like resiliency, build a little bit of discipline, make sure that, you know, we have some mental toughness, as well as like, you know, we're physically like able to get through a workout, to get through practices and things like that. And all of that, you know, in theory, is going to help you be better on the field, just because you're going to be in better shape, right? If you're a little bit stronger, you're a little bit more explosive, you're a little bit faster, a little bit bigger, that means like you might be a little bit more effective on the field. So your performance should increase if you're more explosive, right? Is that always the case? Not necessarily. Like, some guy could add 25 pounds to his power clean, and then still that doesn't necessarily translate to being a better middle linebacker out on the field, because he's not making the right reads, right? So it's like, our performance training, or our strength and conditioning, is to support the things that you're doing on the field, help you get a little bit bigger, faster, stronger, but it's not going to make you the best athlete ever, right? You have to pair the strength conditioning with like that, like skill specific stuff that you do in your sport.
Okay. So at my high school, my strength conditioning coach, nothing on him, like, he's a great guy. He's also our O-line coach. He really emphasized putting on mass, putting on weight, and just like really just putting the weight on. That's the best way to put it. But this last year, he actually finally started to talk about explosion and speed workouts. Like, my football team, they started to focus more on sprints rather than conditioning. We used to run 110s till we died when I played. And then just this, 2 years after I stopped playing in my high school, moved on, play here in college, they're like doing crazy sprints, stop on the dime, kind of like stuff. So leading into that, how has the role of strength and conditioning evolved since your playing days, and how have you adapted from exercise you did to what you've learned in your studies?
That's a great question, and it's kind of like what you're saying. Like, I'm a little bit older than you, so you can like imagine like the differences that I see, like in training versus like when I was actually playing. Like, we used to run gassers all the time, or we used to run like crazy things, like crazy, like different conditioning exercises that had you working for, let's say like a minute to 5 minutes at a time, which doesn't really make sense for a football player, right? When are you ever spending like 3 minutes on the field doing, like, constantly doing work? You're not, right? Like, a play lasts like 10 seconds at most. So like, I've seen as I've like grown in the strength conditioning field, and as the strength conditioning field has grown, that just like you see like sport coaches like kind of understanding better. And I take that as like strength and conditioning coaches doing their job and helping to like educate like sport coaches and athletes on like more effective ways to like train the qualities that are going to help you be better like on the field, right? So like, not having a football player running 110-yard sprints, having them run 20-yard sprints, because you're going to run a lot more 20-yard sprints in a game than you are 110-yard sprints, right? And if we can run those 20-yard sprints and give like a fair amount of rest, then like each rep can be super duper fast, super duper explosive, and that trains you to like really be able to like flip that switch when you're out on the field and make that play, right? Whereas like, if we just kill you with a ton of conditioning, you're not necessarily like super fast. Like, you might be in shape, but you're not pulling away from somebody because you haven't trained fast. You've trained a little bit slower. So I would say like, I've just seen like exercise science and strength conditioning really as a field just like grow. And I think I've seen that just like translate over to like the sports performance side of things, whereas like athletes, coaches, like teams are just they're more aware of what they should and shouldn't be doing to like prepare for like their sport. So I think it's going in the right direction, and we're going to see less and less of like having, you know, athletes just run for extended periods of time, right? Unless it pertains to their sport, like cross country, you still need to go out there and run a lot. But for football, like having you run like 3 miles at a time doesn't really make any sense at all.
I think you told me this, but also my track coach told me this, is that everyone is born with a certain amount of fast twitch and slow twitch muscles, but like it's up to you like to grow them and increase them. And I'm not sure this is a rumor, so that's also why I'm asking. Is it a rumor that like if I condition too much and run long distance too much, it'll ruin my sprinting muscles because I'm gonna be so focused on like growing my slow twitch and like working on running long distance, I won't be as fast? Like that a true thing?
I mean, it really like it's very true. Yeah. So like if you want to get fast, you have to train fast, right? So if you are spending a ton of time conditioning, like you're saying, you are training those slow twitch muscle fibers. So then those like you're saying, we are born with a certain amount of fast twitch and slow twitch. But the way we train can cause like our muscles to behave a little bit differently. So if we train like on the like spectrum of like being really fast and explosive all the time, doing things in really like fast, like rapid bursts where we have plenty of like rest time to recover before the next fast rapid burst, we're training like those fast twitch muscles. So even if you have like a ton of like slow twitch or like kind of middle twitch muscles, if we train them to be like really, really explosive, they'll start to behave a little bit more like that, if that makes sense. So they won't change into like, you won't change a slow twitch muscle fiber into a fast twitch muscle fiber. But you can change its behavior to act a little bit more like a fast twitch muscle fiber. So you can condition yourself to be more explosive in that way, or you can condition yourself to be more on that like slow twitch side of things, which you would do if you were playing a sport that required you to have like a very high like aerobic capacity. So like something like soccer, or you know, we're talking about like long distance running or something like that. You need to have a greater aerobic base. So having a little bit more training, you know, that builds that makes sense for those types of athletes.
I think that's what was so hard for me in high school was because in high school I just did football and track, and so like summer and fall I'd be sprinting, catching balls and stuff, and then winter would start and I'm out there training and running long distance, running miles and miles and miles, and then all of a sudden as soon as spring's over, I'm right back sprinting again. I feel like it's so hard for me to make that transition back and forth, and my coach was like, "It's a good thing you're doing track." I'm like, "Coach, I run the 2 mile." I run long distance. So I felt like I like the only sprinting I did was, you know, the last 200 meters of that race where you're all out. So I just feel like it really messed up like in terms of my training. Also because I knew I wanted to play college football after like my junior year. So it was so rough.
It's like, how often in football are you running 200 meters?
Yeah.
Even that last sprint, it's like by that point in time, like you're fully like, you know, your aerobic capacity is truly being tested there.
Mm-hmm. My coach was always impressed though. My high school coach was always impressed because I'd beat everybody and all like the gassers and the 110s. I'm just out here beating everybody, and it's like, yeah, I'm like that, coach. But right. I look the slowest 40 on the team. So.
Dude, I'm with you on that. Like I think growing up I did a lot more like longer distance stuff, and I would say that like I naturally probably am on that like slow twitch side a little bit more. And so like I was always like really well conditioned playing football and not necessarily like the most explosive. I just had a really high work capacity. But I think like once I got into college and the training was a little better focused towards like being an explosive football player, I got more explosive. But yeah, like we definitely like sound kind of similar in that regard.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Move on to the next question. What should high school football players train to prepare for college football?
That's a great question. And I think this is something that comes up a lot. And really, it's like, I'm not going to lay out like you have to do this exercise or that exercise or anything like that. It's more of like, if you want to prepare yourself for that sport. And if you're trying to get to the next level, like you got to think about what style of training is going to help you get there, right? Like spending a ton of time in the weight room doing high volume work where you're hitting like, 8 to 15 reps on something to try to build muscle isn't a bad thing to do as like a high school athlete training for football or like training for the next level, but it's not something they should spend all their time doing, right? So like building muscle or that typical like bro style like workout can serve a purpose in like the early off season. So if you're like pretty far away from like your season, building a little bit of muscle in like that regard, just incorporating like higher sets and reps is a good thing and can, kind of give you like a nice foundation from which to like build upon. But as you get closer to the season, you need to spend more time like focusing on strength training, right? Getting stronger. So you're going to be hitting like rep ranges like on things that are going to be 5 or under, right? We're not really getting a ton stronger if we're hitting like 10 reps on something. If we're hitting like 3 reps on something with a heavy weight, like that's kind of challenging our nervous system and our muscles in a little bit of a different way to help us make those strength gains. But then it's like you can't spend too much time just lifting heavy weights because football isn't played at the speed that those heavy weights are lifted at, right? Like if you go for a 1 rep max bench press or a squat, right? It's a pretty slow movement, right? If you're really challenging that 1 RM, like it's probably going to take you a couple seconds to like explode out of the hole and actually get to the top. Football happens much faster than that. So as you get closer to the season, we should spend more time like moving things faster, right? So you might still be doing those same exercises. You might be hitting like a squat for like 5 reps or something, but it's at a lighter load that you can move at a much faster velocity. And then like we're probably incorporating other exercises like Olympic lifts, like a clean or like a jerk, maybe even like a snatch, but incorporating like plyometrics and sprints into our training so that our body is prepared to move at the speeds that it's going to move at on the field, right? So it's like we can build some muscle in our training. We need to build a lot of strength in our training, but we also need to build that power and that speed. And it kind of happens almost in that order. Like you spend some of your early like training time building that muscle, spend some time building that strength, but then we need to translate those gains into being more explosive and to being faster.
Okay. So I'm gonna tell you what I do then. So over spring we work out with you, and then we have spring ball, and we go home. Over the summer I work out with a guy. He's actually my best friend. He's actually gonna be the co-host of the podcast when I go home with him. Bench to Mike podcast on Instagram. He was going to be a D1 bodybuilder at Bowling Green. He was going to walk on to the team. And he's just like really short. He's like 5'6", but he's just huge, just jacked and lean. He was a All-Ohio lineman in high school, but he lost a lot of like his fat. Like, he's just really lean and jacked now. But he was like on my butt all summer about like, we need to do heavy weight, heavy reps. And I'm like, I just don't know, because like Coach Kyle was preaching this to me. He's like, no, heavy weight, heavy reps. And we were like, that's only for squat and bench, but like we were like training till failure on everything else. I was like, we were doing like calf raises, like on like a seated calf raise when we put like 4 plates on there, and we were just doing it till failure. We did like 6 sets till failure, and like by the end of the workout, I was dead. And then I'd go to like take a nap, and then I'd get up and do field work. And I feel like my field work wasn't like as explosive because I just murdered my legs and arms. Shout out Michael though. Michael was pushing me on the field work. Michael's a guy. He makes me like protein milkshakes over the summer. Love that guy.
Nice.
But yeah, he was helping me in the field work. But my other friend, who's gonna be the co-host of the Bench to Mike podcast on Instagram, he was just like emphasizing like heavy weight, heavy reps, and he's like, you can still be explosive with it. I'm like, not on my 8th, 9th, 10th rep where I'm struggling to get up. Like,
right.
I mean, he pushed me to my limits. I mean, I feel so much stronger from that, but like I just don't know how that translates. And it's like, what's your thoughts on that in terms of like summer workout? I'm killing myself on failure till failure.
Yeah. I mean, so like nothing against like bodybuilding. Like I like to, incorporate some of that into our training too. Like there's some times where we're like pushing that like higher volume stuff. I would just say, like you just said, like by your 8th rep, like you're not explosive, right? Like I think that just intuitively is like, like you were very intuitive about it. You're like, yeah, at rep 8, I'm not that explosive. And it's like, you're right. That's why, like, when we are really trying to build that strength and to build like our explosive power, we're really going to be the most of, we're going to have, we're going to train most effectively if we're using like lower rep ranges. Because like you said, like you kind of get exhausted after, 5 reps, right? So it's like, think about it like this. You wouldn't do 8 reps of a power clean. No. Like, I don't think I've ever prescribed more than like 3 reps on a power clean. And it's just like your body doesn't fire at that explosive rate after a few repetitions. So, like, not that you shouldn't ever spend any time in that higher like volume and really pushing it. I think that's was probably good for you. I think everybody's a little bit different. Like, you were a little bit undersized, so a little extra of that in your training is probably not a bad thing, because that probably helps you build a little bit more size, helped you build maybe a little bit of strength towards like those higher rep ranges. But it's not what I would prescribe for an athlete all the time, right? Like, again, I think like if you're far enough away from the season, you can absolutely spend time like doing workouts like that. But the closer that you get to your season, it's going to be better and make a little bit more sense if you train a little bit more explosively, not so much to like exhaust yourself or take yourself to failure. Not that you're not going to be dead after a workout. It's just going to be a little bit of a different feeling, right? So like really conditioning your explosive ability rather than your work capacity, if that makes sense. I think like bodybuilders, like their sport is to have as much muscle on their body as possible, and it's all about how they look and how they perform like on stage with their poses and stuff like that. And if you look at their competition versus a football game, they don't really look anything alike, right? So our training shouldn't be identical all the time, if that makes sense.
Okay. So like with me being hurt right now and won't play football with the team until spring ball, should I be like focusing on like heavy reps? Like should I be doing the bodybuilder workout right now since like I'm not playing? And
I think you're really far away from your next competitive season, that if you're spending more time doing that, there's nothing wrong with that. I would say like don't get too far away from that like explosive training. Like, even if you're doing bodybuilding style like workouts, you can still go like put that field work in. You can still go work on like being explosive and like running sprints and catching balls. And I would say, to get the most like bang for your buck, do your field work before your bodybuilding workouts, if that makes sense, right? Because like you said, legs were a little bit dead, and then I would go and like put that work in on the field. If you would have put that work in on the field first when you were fresh, you're training at like you're training your explosive ability like when you're the freshest, which makes the most sense, versus like when you're fatigued. So you're gonna get a little bit more out of it. Maybe each like sprint's just a little bit faster, a little bit crisper. So those are things to like keep in mind. I don't think there's anything wrong with you building muscle, especially because like for you, it's like really, really early off season. So I would just keep in the back of your head that like that hypertrophy training doesn't, translate to you being more explosive, right? Like, you might get bigger from it. You might get a little bit stronger from it, but you're not going to max out your strength gains or your like power producing capabilities with that style of training.
So like, how would you describe the difference between like strength and like explosive power? Like, what's the difference?
So the difference is the speed. Like, that would be the best way to like think about it. Is our max like strength is happening, at like 100%, right? So it would be like, if we're thinking about like a percentage of weight, your 1 rep max is the most that you can do. If we're thinking about like an explosive movement, we're probably going to be 80% of that 1 rep max or lower, right? So if I asked you to put 65% of your 1 rep like bench on the bar, and then on the next rack over, I had you put like 100% of your, whatever your 1 rep max is, let's say it's 250 pounds or whatever. And then I have you put 65% on the bar next to it. And we just watch how slow like that bench press goes up with your 250 pounds versus 65%. Like that's power. So power is how fast like you can move a load, right? So if we're looking at it like in terms of like an equation or something, if you want to like look at work is just force times displacement. So it's just how much load that you have on the bar and like how much you're moving it, right?
Okay.
So if we're talking power, we just put a time component on there. So now it's how much force you're applying, but how fast you're applying that force. So the more like powerful or explosive person is going to move like the same weight faster than the other person. So like there's actually technology out there that our exercise science department has, and I've played around with it a little bit, but we can put a sensor on a barbell and it connects to like an app, and we can track the speed of the bar. And so like if we really, really wanted to focus a ton on making sure every single rep was as explosive as possible, we would put this on the bar, and we wouldn't even be targeting load. We would be targeting the velocity of the bar. So we have sensors now. A lot of like bigger D1 schools will use these things. Sometimes they call them Tendo units. There's different technology out there now that's not a Tendo unit, but basically it's tracking how fast you're moving a given load. So like I might tell you, we want 75% of your 1 rep max on the bar. Well, today, because you're like fatigued, your 75% maybe isn't the 75% that you would have hit a week ago when you weren't fatigued. So like if we look at the velocity, we can like readjust the load. So like we would know based on how fast you were moving something, if you were around like what would be your 75% for that day. So it's like if we're trying to focus solely on like being explosive, like we can do things like track the speed of the bar.
Wow, that's awesome. Are we gonna start doing that, you think, with football players, or like
I would love to do that. It's just to have enough of those sensors is kind of expensive. Like I was saying, like if you go, so over the summer or no, last spring, I had the opportunity to help out with like a high school football showcase. Basically, they were doing a bunch of combine testing for high school athletes trying to make it to the next level. And this happened at the Cleveland Browns like training facility. So I was there like leading a warm up for these guys who were going to do this combine testing. So I got the opportunity to like go through the Cleveland Browns like training facility. It was pretty sweet, right? Every single rack had one of those sensors on it and like a tablet. So like if you were in the rack and you were doing a squat, you have this tablet up here that you can see, and it's going to give you like instant feedback on how fast your rep was. It's going to give you like a green check if you hit the right speed, or a red X if you didn't hit the right speed. So that is something that I think happens a lot at the Division I level because there's a lot more funding for like equipment like that. Like I was telling you, our exercise science department has a couple of these sensors, but not enough for us to train 80 football guys in one session on them, right? So like we kind of resort to, hey, hit 70% of that 1 rep max, because 70% is around the velocity that we, are trying to hit. So it's like not exact, but we do that a little bit, like when we go through different phases and I'm telling you, hey, like our emphasis here is on moving that bar with speed. It would be like perfect to be able to have one of those sensors on every single rack. So then people couldn't debate on, well, no, I was moving that fast enough. I'd be like, well, now we know because it tells me that you did or you didn't, right? But yeah.
It's like it's like another version of like accountability, because I feel like there's some position groups that are kind of just hide off in the corners. You know what I'm saying? That definitely could use the work.
Right. Yeah.
But that'd be sweet if we could get that. Hopefully, that's a future thing for us.
I think eventually it'll be there. Like just in talking with like some of the exercise science professors, like Dr. Mendel, he's really like interested in some of this. They call it velocity-based training, and we've had some good like talks about it. And it's just a matter of like having the right funding to like have enough of them to actually be able to do it. Like I could probably get away with doing it with like a really like small team right now with just the number of sensors that we had. So maybe like the smallest team I think that I have right now is like the men's volleyball team. So I could probably have them like really solely focused on like velocity based training, but it just wouldn't work out from an efficiency standpoint for 80 guys in a training session at this point.
Yeah. Well, that's still really cool. That might be a potential future for us. We'll go to the next question though. So my other question was the difference in training for a football player versus a gym bro? But you kind of already went over that. So could you share general nutrition advice to football players? Just general nutrition advice.
Yeah. I get this question a lot, and to be like super general about it is like, you need to make sure you're eating enough first and foremost. And when I'm talking about like eating enough, it's not just eating mass amounts of food, right? Everybody has a certain amount of like protein that they should be trying to hit on a daily basis, and a certain amount of like carbs that their body needs based on like the activity that they're doing on a regular basis. And then you kind of fill in the rest of your nutrition with like fat. We can't like get away from eating like fat, even though some people try and tell you that you should, or that you should only eat fat. No, like we're talking about eating for performance. And so I would say like a pretty good rule, just for like a football player, if we're trying to hit the right amount of protein, it's pretty safe to say you're getting enough protein in if you're hitting 1 gram per pound of body weight, right? So if you weigh 200 pounds, you should be trying to get 200 grams of protein in per day. And if we're talking about like how many carbs like you should be getting in, I think for a football player, somewhere between like 3 to 5 grams per kilogram of body weight would be a good place to shoot for. So then if you wanted to do that math, which I'm not going to try to do the kilogram math right now, that's generally a good place. So, like you're probably going to be somewhere. I think I made a little bit of like a nutrition thing for you last year.
Mm-hmm.
I probably had you eating like 300 plus grams of carbs in a day, I imagine. Yeah. So like you should not be afraid of eating carbs. You should not be afraid of eating fat. If you're a football player, you should be like aware of those different macronutrients though. So don't just think I just need to eat a ton of food. It's like eating the right amount of protein to support your muscles and to help like your muscles grow is super important. So really the first and foremost is track the amount of protein that you're getting in. And then carbs is going to be the main fuel source that your body is using in your training sessions and when you're out there like practicing or playing a game. So making sure you have plenty of carbs in your system is huge. And then just like filling in the rest of your diet with like fat. So to give you like an exact, I would say would be challenging because it's usually based on your body weight. Like if we were trying to give you an appropriate amount of like macros for your body, we would do like a little equation and just take your body weight and multiply it by a number between like 11 or 18, I think are the numbers I usually use. And that's going to give me an estimate of how many calories your body burns in a day. And then from there, that's when I'll like break down, okay, like if we need to hit 3,000 calories in a day, how many of those calories are coming from protein, how many are coming from carbs, how many are coming from fat. I would say the biggest thing, focus on hitting the protein first, making sure you're eating a ton of carbs, but not too much, right? Like don't eat so much food that you start seeing a ton of fat come onto your body, right? If we're trying to build weight or if we're trying to add weight, build some mass, like we want a good portion of that to be lean, right? So if you're eating enough protein, more of that like mass that you're adding will be lean. But if you're not eating enough, like it's gonna be fat, right? I know that that's like not exactly like a clear cut like way to say, hey, you need to eat this, and this. It's a little bit individual, right? So like nutrition really depends on your body and like how your body like burns calories, right? So some people have a very fast metabolism, other people have very slow metabolism. So like you kind of have to do a little bit of trial and error to figure out what's going to work for you and like what your goals are. Some guys are trying to gain weight, some guys are trying to lose weight, so it's going to look a little bit different. ultimately, though, most important thing is hit the right amount of protein, and you'll be headed in the right direction.
That's pretty good general advice. Works for me. So I have like 3 more questions. That we'll just bang out, and then we'll get out of here.
All right.
So injuries are part of football. How do you incorporate injury prevention strategies into your training programs, and what are some common injuries players should be mindful of?
I get this question a lot, and what it comes down to more than anything, as far as like injury prevention goes, is warming up appropriately. So the most effective way to prevent injury is to go through like an effective warm up. So I like to use the analogy of take a rubber band and put a rubber band in a freezer, and then take another rubber band and lay it out on the sidewalk on a 100-degree day. If you take those rubber bands out after that period of time, let's say 15 minutes, and you were to take the one that was in the freezer and you pull it apart, it's not going to snap back. Chances are it's going to break, right? If you take the one that was sitting out on the sidewalk in the heat, you pull it, it's going to slap back, or it's going to snap back really, really quickly, right? So this is akin to like our muscles and our tissues. If we're not warmed up enough, we have a much greater chance of like that snap being like one of our muscles, or that being like a tendon or something that like gets pulled or irritated in a weird way. Whereas if our body is warm and our tissues are warm, they're going to snap back in the way that they should. So injury prevention really starts with effectively warming up. And in that warm up, like when I'm training athletes, I incorporate a lot of things that put you on one leg, doing different types of like hops, different types of ways to have you like stop and start, or to like change direction. These are like things that have just been proven to help like prevent like things like an ACL injury. So if we're talking about what kind of injuries are common in football players that we need to worry about, it's just like, I would say an ACL is, one of the worst injuries anybody can sustain in sport. We get a lot of ankle sprains as well. So those would be like 2 injuries like occurring at a joint. Another injury that's pretty common in football players would be some sort of damage to the rotator cuff or to the AC joint in the shoulder. We also have guys who, might like break a finger, might like mess up a wrist, a hand, things like that. Smaller little like nagging injuries to be aware of are like muscle pulls. So you like hear some guys who like pull their hamstring or like pull their groin. Those are probably the 2 biggest muscles that get pulled by football players. And usually we see a lot of those happening like early on, like when they come back from like the summer and we start like our like preseason prep. And sometimes that's because they either didn't do enough sprinting leading up to like camp, or they did too much sprinting and not enough strength training. So we kind of have to have the right balance of running sprints and lifting weights, because sprints kind of like prepare our tendons a little bit differently than like heavy strength training does. Whereas like heavy strength training will prepare our muscles like in a little bit of a different way than like sprinting does. So if we've paired the 2 appropriately, then we shouldn't have any like pulls or tears or anything like that. If we spent too much time sprinting, then we might have a really strong tendon that will cause a muscle to pull. If we haven't spent enough time sprinting, then we might have a really strong muscle that'll cause a tendon to tear. So it's like having the right balance. So those are just things to keep in mind. And also if we're talking like football players, like doing things that like making cuts like leading up to season is really, really important. Like preparing your body to make some of those really fast, aggressive movements that you're going to be making in sport before you actually get out there on the field with somebody like pushing you at the same time is really, really important. So like if you didn't do any of those cuts, you'd be more likely to have a non-contact injury where you tear your ACL just from like moving in a weird way that your body wasn't prepared to do. It's like we can prevent injury by just like doing things at a very like high speed out on the field, like leading up to our sport, we can't prevent, contact injuries where someone takes a knee to, or like a helmet to the knee and like tears their ACL, right? So it's like there's certain things we can prevent, certain things we can't.
In terms of when a player is already injured, I just want to shout out Coach Kyle for this. So I'm not gonna brag, but I am someone that loves the weight room, and I'm usually the first person there, last one to leave. Like I love spending extra time in the weight room. I like to put the extra work in. And last year during fall camp, I had like a almost hernia, but like a groin strain thing, and it was really bad. I couldn't like get my legs off the ground. I couldn't do any core workouts. I couldn't bench without feeling like this bulge coming out of my groin. And Coach Kyle was the first guy, like, okay, let's strengthen your core. Let's stretch. Let's do this. Like, he was someone that was just on my butt, and he was like, we can do this to strengthen. We can do this to make it better, because it was such a weird thing. Doctor was like, you don't need therapy, but you could do surgery, but also you don't need it. And it was just like a really awkward injury, but Coach Kyle just came in and just knew what to do. And then this year when I broke my pinky, I was feeling really discouraged. I'm like, I can't bench, I can't do upper body. I guess I can do legs. But I was still showing up to lifting, still trying to do what I could. But he was like pushing me, encouraging me, and just like, like you can still do the left arm. Like you can still like strengthen the left arm and it'll work on your right arm. Like he was just telling me the science behind it and really just pushing me. So just a big thank you just to, keep me going, keep me encouraged. So just in terms of that, like Coach Cal is really good working with the injured kids, and like we also had a guy that tore his ACL before he even got to fall camp. And I think Coach Cal's been working with him on his knee the whole time, like just stretching it and like re-strengthening that. So Coach Cal's pretty good for that.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think whenever I deal with an athlete who is dealing with an injury, I like have flashbacks to when I played and I dealt with some serious injuries, and like it's a tough time, man. Like your boys are out there like training, or they're out there on the field like going hard, and you can't be out there with them. It sucks, and it's like maybe there's not a ton that you can do in a training session, but like if we can do something, like that's just like beneficial for not only your body but also for your mind, right? Like if you can come into the weight room and do your rehab exercises in there while the team's working out, that just like makes you still feel like you're a part of it. And it's like I'm always trying to like make good use of time. So if somebody comes in and they're injured and they're just sitting off to the side, I go up to them like, hey dude, like what's going on? Like what's wrong? Oh, cool. Do you have any exercises that your physical therapist gave you or that like the AT gave you? Yes. Well, let's do those while we're in here. Why not? Like doing more of those is only going to be a good thing. Oh, you don't have any of those exercises? Well, tell me a little bit more about your injury. I can try to come up with something, or like we'll rewrite the workout so we can work around your injury so that you still feel like you're doing something, that your body's still like going through something, you're getting a good sweat on, you're feeling good about it, but also your mind, right? Like it makes us feel good to like still feel like we're headed in the direction that we're supposed to be going in.
Yeah, 100%. I think the hardest thing too of being injured is like everyone's working to like get better, but you're just working to get your body right. Like, and like when you came up to me, you're like, you can still do the push-off press if you just do your left arm, or you can still bench if you just do a dumbbell with the left arm. I'm like, okay, I guess you're right. So
yeah, exactly.
a really swole left arm and a skinny right arm. So yeah, no, it was definitely a rough time, but I'm grateful to have a strength and conditioning coach like Coach Kyle, because like he really figures it out for us. And I feel like it's not a common thing at Division III, especially with like funding and just like what's offered here. So it's pretty cool.
Well, thanks, man.
You're absolutely welcome. So I got 2 more questions.
All right.
So mental toughness is crucial for success in football. How do you address the mental aspect of training with your athletes, and what strategies do you use to build their mental resilience?
That's interesting, like, because mental toughness is huge, right? Like, mm-hmm. I would say, like in our training, like mental toughness is just like it can come in subtle ways, and it can come in like more obvious ways. So like it could come in an obvious way by like giving you guys a really tough like core finisher, giving you some like plate pushers at the end that are really going to put you into like a fatigued state to where like your body's going to be telling you to quit, but I'm going to be yelling at you not to quit, right? So it's like just sometimes like mental toughness is you've just got to get through this. It's going to suck. It's going to suck, but we're going to get through it together, and like having the guys in there like who are all going through it like kind of help. Maybe some other like mental toughness just comes in like other subtle ways where it's like we're going through a warm up, something doesn't, somebody doesn't do something right, we're starting over, right? It kind of like teaches you like you have to stay disciplined and you can't let your guard down, like even for 1 second. Like we need to do everything the right way, and it kind of keeps you mentally sharp and mentally tough in that way. So I think like incorporating it in like subtle ways with things like that, just like keeping you accountable, and then in more obvious ways by like putting you through something that is like really tough that you're gonna be capable of doing, your body's capable of doing it. But as soon as your body starts to like go through it, you're going to get all of these like things going through your mind telling you to quit. And that's like where we build that resiliency by not giving up.
I think the worst with your training is like during like the springtime, like right when we get back, you're having us do these like sideways bear crawls, like touching the wall and coming back. That was always really hard for me to like, I hate Coach Kyle. Like, I hate this guy. And then those like finishers we did like a split squat, but we're like holding a plate. That was the worst, and like that was always hard for me. Like, I hate Coach Kyle. I hate this guy. It just like I think those are probably the two worst in terms of like, man, I really got to be mentally tough. Like just going through your program, like that was always the worst for me. Just doing those like core and what do you call that split squat? Like what do you call that again?
I think I took that from a strength coach named Cal Dietz. He calls it spring foot. Yeah.
It's the worst because like your quad burns in your right leg, but then your left calf is burning, plus your arms are burning. You don't have this like 45-pound plate. Oh man, I hope it's easier this year.
It will be. You're more mentally tough than you were last year.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So a final question. Can you share some success stories of athletes you've trained and who have seen significant improvements in their performance, especially in terms of strength and conditioning?
Yeah, I mean, I could just look across the table and like give an example of you. Like you came in here as a 155-pound freshman, and you were somebody who put the work in. You were somebody who came up and asked questions, or came and said, "Hey, can you come watch my form on this? Can you help me out with this? I can't figure this out." You were somebody who was like very open to coaching and like recognizing and recognizing where you were at. You accepted where you were at. You weren't fighting the fact that you were this 100, like you were very aware, hey, like I'm small and I need to get bigger, right? And I would say like you're a success. Like you've put on a ton of weight, right? You've gotten so much stronger, and it just came from like your discipline and from you like being open and being willing to like listen to like what someone else has to say and to tell you to like get better, right? So I would say you're one of those success stories, and I have plenty of other like athletes like that just like a lot of times it's a consistency thing. So I'll see a lot of like freshmen like that'll come in and like they're in college, they're playing a college sport, so they're athletic, but maybe they're not like the biggest, fastest, or strongest guy. And part of that could be because they didn't have a great like strength and conditioning program in high school, or maybe they were super busy and didn't spend a lot of time like lifting weights. But then you see them in this like team training like environment where like they're working out with their team every single day, and they're forced into this consistent schedule, and like they just like blow up in a matter of like one semester, right? Like you'll see kids like add 50 pounds to a front squat, and it's not because like my program is amazing and is going to, make every single person ever add 50 pounds to their front squat. It's just this person wasn't consistent and didn't have like this sort of structure like up to this point. And once they got on that sort of a system, it like caused, their body to just like make some like serious gains. I would just say that's like what I see is when athletes get consistent and when they are open to coaching and are willing to do whatever it takes to attain the goals that they set themselves, they can achieve it, right? It's just, I think consistency in training is where I see like that blossoming happen.
And like, the fact that you bring up consistency reminded me of like my high school days, because there was actually this rule in my high school that after a season was finished, unless you're going to play another sport, which is a common thing at small schools, everybody plays every sport. Mm-hmm. But I didn't play basketball, so only like the football guys would play football when the season ended to play basketball, and they'd be in the weight room with basketball. But if you just played football and then started doing sports in the winter, you couldn't be in the weight room for like a month and a half. It was like a OHSAA rule or something. My school like really enforced like you can't be in the weight room after your season until like a month and a half. So it's like I didn't have access to like any more strength training. I couldn't work for the next season until January. Like it was like I had to take November and December off because my schools wouldn't let me in there. I feel like that could have been a huge advantage for me just to get in there. But my school was like, no, we're not opening the weight room. So like for 2 months it was closed.
Dang, I didn't realize that was a rule. That's interesting.
That's when my school always enforced. My strength and conditioning coach always like, Caleb, you can't go in there today. Like you have to wait till January. I'm like, but like the season ended in like late October. Like it's November. Can I please lift now? Like
right.
Yeah, it was a really weird thing. I feel like those 2 months could have been crucial because that could have been my time just to really put on because it's 5 days of lifting.
Yeah.
But maybe it changed. I'm not sure what they did last year, and because a lot of things changed in terms of like not coaching change, but like my coaches like they just kind of open their minds more. I feel like the training they're doing now is way different than what I was doing. That was only 2 seasons ago. So yeah, I don't know. But that was something that happened when I was in high school, and that made me think of like, dang, I could have had 2 more months of grinding.
Yeah, right. It's like, all right, well, if I can't get into this weight room, I got to go find one that I can get into, right?
And usually I couldn't, so I just wouldn't train. I wouldn't train for those whole 2 months. But it would have been good for me. So
yeah.
But yeah, so we'll close out the podcast here. Appreciate you boys watching. Coach Kyle, you have any closing remarks or anything? Anything you want to say to the viewers?
I just want to thank you for having me on, man. Like, you know, like I watch like your channel, and I think it's awesome that you're doing this, and I just want you to keep going all in on it. Keep going, man. And anytime you ever need anything from me, just hit me up, man. Like awesome. I really feel honored that you asked me to like do this with you. So
yeah,
thank you.
I'm glad to have you for sure. If you guys want to see a part 2 with Coach Kyle, like and comment the video. I have a couple more questions like I could ask him. We're running out of time today, but yeah, appreciate you boys watching. I'll catch y'all next time. Peace.
Later.